Congressman Turner, thanks indeed for joining us again on BBC News. If we can start by discussing Alexei Navalny, we hear today that his mother has finally had access to her son, but she's been told that his body will not be released to her unless she agrees to have a private burial, a private funeral ceremony. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think this just continues to show that just really the thuggery of Vladimir Putin. When the announcement that Navalny was dead occurred at the Munich Security Conference, his wife, then widow, took the stage, and of course, in disbelief that he had passed. Then she met with the U.S. delegation at the Munich Security Conference, and we, expressed our sorrow to her, but also she gave the warning to the West to understand that Vladimir Putin's aggression against Ukraine is not isolated. His attempt to take on the West, to take on democracy, to impose authoritarianism, is really symbolized in Navalny's death, and of course now what is occurring with his mother and the constriction of his funeral.
Was there anything that you could say to Yulia about how the U.S. might be able to help her?
Well, we certainly both gave, our sorrow and condolences and our support. She has a message now that people need to hear around the world, and that is, the danger of Vladimir Putin not being contained, the danger of the United States and others not answering as he seeks to impose authoritarianism upon democracies. And as we saw with the voice of her husband, who is a voice for democracy and change, Vladimir Putin will obviously not stop at anything. And as we mourn his death, we really mourn what's occurring in Russia right now.
On that point, President Biden said he will announce a new range of sanctions tomorrow. What does he need to do?
Well, already there have been significant sanctions against Russia to try to have economic impact against their ability to fund their weapons, their military system, as they seek to impose their will upon Ukraine. As you know, Vladimir Putin has made statements that his goals are much farther than Ukraine. He looks to Eastern Europe. He looks to the area of the former Soviet Union. And so we see even areas that are currently under NATO that are at risk. The president, in his resolve, as he looks to increase sanctions, is also making the point to Congress that we're at a critical point of Ukraine aid. And certainly, we need to make certain that the House and Senate delivers to the president's desk a bill that funds Ukraine aid so that they can continue their fight against Vladimir Putin's aggression.
You and your colleagues have been unable to do that thus far. What has changed that gives you confidence that that might happen?
Well, the Speaker Johnson has said repeatedly that he supports Ukraine and he supports Ukraine funding. I've sat with him while he was with the Secretary General of NATO and President Zelensky himself, where he's made statements of his commitment to ensure that the aid gets to Ukraine. Unfortunately, there have been other issues that have gotten in the way of getting that aid out. I think that as a result of meetings that occurred this weekend, I think when we get back, Congress is going to be placing this as number one, make certain that this aid, both to Ukraine, Israel, and to the East Asia, gets out of Congress and gets in the hands of those who are fighting for democracy.
But what does that look like? Does that look like separating out the border measures package from the Ukrainian funding?
Well, I think there will be probably separate votes for the different elements because there are individuals who support some of the packages and not all of the packages. But in the end, this will be one package and it needs to get to the president's desk.
But Speaker Johnson, for all that you've said there about him being committed to support Ukraine, has failed to even schedule a vote on this. So has he given you any indication of a timeline for when that might happen?
This has been a difficult path, and largely due to infighting of a very small group of individuals on the Republican side who have continued to threaten the speaker. As you know, we lost Kevin McCarthy, who was serving as speaker, to that same small group that really is now in the way not only of Ukraine aid and Israel aid, but even the United States getting its own funding done for its own military for this year. I think Speaker Johnson is putting together his package to make certain that he has support both from Democrats and Republicans so we can get it through the Senate and to the president.
But just on the timeline, I mean, time is ticking in terms of funding the whole government and avoiding a shutdown. So just to answer that point.
Right. So as we go into the beginning of March, into the second week, it's certainly going to be critical that we get this done. I think that Speaker Johnson has pulled his team together, and we're probably going to see some significant legislative work that hits the House floor in order to make these important timelines.
Now, part of that package and everything that you'll be voting on, there's also aid to Israel, there's humanitarian aid to Gaza as well. We've seen a change in the language from President Biden and his administration officials, and this call for a temporary ceasefire, which we hadn't seen before. Do you support that call?
I think right now that we need to be focused on the House side of getting this package out so that Israel knows and the president knows that the resources are there to be able to continue to support them. I do think that there are ongoing negotiations with respect to hostages that are there. CIA Director Burns has been in and out of the area. I certainly support his efforts, which at times, it resulted in the last ceasefire. I think there may be opportunities for both ceasefire and the hostages being released. But overall, we have to look at making certain that the terrorists, Hamas, who both hold the Palestinians in Gaza hostage themselves, but are also a threat to Israel.
So would you support his call for a temporary ceasefire?
Well, yeah, I think we have to look at what's happening in Gaza itself, and things are evolving there. Right now, the House needs to be focused not on whether there should be a ceasefire, but whether or not the United States gets its funding out the door and to Israel.
Okay, and just the broader sort of U.S. position in the region. Of course, we've heard so many times a desire to avoid conflict spreading, yet we have the U.S. military involved in operations around the Red Sea. What's your view of where that's going? Does that need to be stepped up or changed in any way?
Right. Our whole focus has to be to understanding that this is Iran, and both Iran proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, no matter what name you put on them, they're all a result of the franchises of Iran. They fund them, they train them, they even direct them, and many times they're identifying targets. They themselves continue in their training of these individuals to destabilize the area. There have been attacks, as you know, on commercial shipping areas, Saudi Arabia, the United States, in Iraq, Syria, Israel itself. All of these areas, the instability is because of what Iran is doing, and the focus needs to be on stopping Iran.
Okay. Representative Mike Turner, chairperson of the House Intel Committee, thanks so much for being with us here on BBC News.
Thanks for having me.